And it's another week, another session. Looks like today's going to be a good one. Glad you folks can join us. Greetings, fellow imagers. This is week 6, part 6, Thus saith the Lord, chapters 26 through 30, The Unseen Realm by Michael S. Heiser. Here we go. Chapter 26 picks up where we left off with post-conquest war conflict. Although the conquest wars are over, things are definitely not looking good for Israel as conflict persists. The period of judges and a monarchy form a tale of both military and spiritual struggle in the form of the Nephilim remnant and the ongoing battle of Israel's loyalty to the Most High. In Holy Ground, we explore the tabernacle of God's divine pattern, citing the earthly tent structure as a model to mimic the heavenly tent structure. See Isaiah 40, verse 22. We see that the tabernacle was Yahweh's throne room. It moved with Israel, and the tabernacle contained imagery associated with Eden. In temple as the cosmic tent dwelling, we find that the tabernacle was most likely moved into the temple constructed by Solomon. In addition of the cherubim statues and arrangement of the ark in the Holy of Holies, leads some scholars to believe that the tabernacle was moved into the temple and that Yahweh was seated and lived in the temple. The temple as cosmic mountain and garden reveals similarities with the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem, associated with cosmic mountain dwelling like Mount Sinai. The reference to the heights of the north is most likely taken from Ugarit use as a polemic more than a geographic feature, as the north was where Baal was alleged to have lived and ran the cosmos. The temple is also associated with the Edenic garden through the use of carved garden-like architectural features. In Israel's theology, Eden, the tabernacle, Sinai, and the temple were equally the abode of Yahweh and his council. In Unholy Ground, we find that wherever Israel had failed to eliminate the Anakim, Nephilim giant clans, during their Transjordan campaign, these same areas became the sinister places associated with the powers of darkness. Gee, I wonder why. Since the conquest failed to eliminate all the Anakim, per Joshua chapter 11, verse 22, the Rephaim presence, or Anakim, or Nephilim, pick your poison, persisted in the land until the time of David. Not surprisingly, there are several Old Testament references linking the valley of the Rephaim as associated with death and darkness. Examples would be Valley of Rephaim adjoined with the Valley of Hinnom, which is linked to the New Testament's Gehenna. The Valley of Hinnom, or the Valley of Wailing, was also linked to child sacrifices to the god Molech, or what I like to call the child abortion god. The meaning and identity of Molech is hotly debated, but there is a close Ugaritic connection with this guy actually being the patron deity of the Rephaim. Oh man. Spiritual Valley finds us investigating Israel's demand for a king as a rejection of Yahweh's ability as divine warrior and protector over his obedient, and that's in air quotes, people. Israel's moronic preference for the tallest person to be king must have had God's grace setting on max. Eventually, hope will come in the form of David, the man after God's own heart, and his line would solidify as rightful heirs to God's kingdom. David's united Israel, however, would only last one generation. The kingdom would then split in two, followed by mass disloyalty to Yahweh, which according to our prior reading was a big no-no. Jeroboam, the king of the northern tribes, would end up setting up cult centers in Shechem, the place where Joshua dedicated the nation to finishing up the job of the conquest before his death. Baal worship ends up on the spiritual menu for the Israelites in the areas of Dan, which is also governs Bashan near Mount Hermon. Read that, all about that. And Bethel, which must have really been a slap in the face because that's where Yahweh appeared to the patriarchs. The southern kingdom of Judah would also fall, having kings who would turn from Yahweh and cause the dynasty to collapse and the people sent into exile. In chapter 27, standing in the council, we asked the question, just what was a prophet? Basically, there were people who spoke for God. They told people the truth about what their actions were doing in relation to the covenant relationship they had with Yahweh, and often paid for their words with their lives. We see the first prophet as the unlikely Adam. But in order to see Adam as a prophetic figure, you need to go outside of Genesis. Job 15 verses 7 and 8 will do it. The phrase of God, as far as was walking as a man, flows in with the description of God walking, as also used regarding God's presence behind the veil within the tabernacle. Both Enoch and Noah walked with God. First Enoch provides an account of Enoch delivering God's judgment against the fallen sons of God. Noah also walked with God, as God spoke directly to Noah in Genesis 6:9 about the coming flood. Under the patriarchs, Yahweh's multiple appearances to Abraham are looked at in establishing his prophet status. The symbolism behind the oak of Moreh is discussed. Abraham became the conduit of God's truth to the disinherited nations at Babel. His son Isaac maintained the same prophetic status, and in Jacob we find multiple and quite dramatic encounters with Yahweh, and for his efforts he is given the covenant status of father and grandfather. Slowly a pattern emerges. As God chooses someone to represent him, that person must meet with God discernibly by human senses, and that meeting occurs in a place described as God's home or headquarters, where the divine council is also present. In the case of Moses, Joshua, and the judges, Moses' prophetic status is solidified with multiple divine encounters, clearly some of the greatest ever put to film. Joshua, through his leadership in the conquest wars, was validated in the same way. Classic prophets, or the ones we normally think about occupying the middle sections of our Bibles, has scenes like the divine throne room encounter in Isaiah 6. This is where the famous divine council scene takes place with the line, "Whom shall I send, Yahweh? Whom will go for us?" Divine council. Yahweh also has his council visit with Ezekiel at the start of his prophetic career, and Jeremiah is given an encounter by an embodied Yahweh who touches Jeremiah's mouth with the coal and who stood before Yahweh's divine council. In chapter 28, the divine misdirection, we explore the failures of Israel leading up to the coming Messiah, namely the incomplete conquest, the splintering of unity among the 12 tribes, the collapse of the Davidic dynasty, and the final nail in the coffin here, the exile into Babylon. It quickly becomes apparent that only Yahweh could be trusted. He would need to do the heavy lifting. He would need to become a man and inhabit the hearts of his children. The temple tabernacle was not enough. He would need to indwell those who would choose to follow him. Yahweh would send his spirit to indwell his people. They would not be trusted with their freedom or free will, but he would not eradicate it, nor would he leave them without enablement. If this is not the Messiah you were looking for, we see how, by God's design, Scripture presents the Messiah as a mosaic, discernible only after the pieces were assembled. Features of this include Old Testament profile of the Messiah was deliberately veiled, 1 Corinthians 2 verses 6 to 8. There were technically no Old Testament verses of a dying Messiah, and no not even Isaiah 53, as the word Messiah does not appear anywhere in that chapter. The concept of a dying and rising Messiah must be pieced together. It's not written anywhere. Piece matching required supernatural enlightenment. See Luke chapter 24 and his walk and Bible study discussion with the two disciples. In Genesis 3:15 account, Christians tend to believe that Christ is the offspring of Eve that bruises the head of the Nakash. However, that's not how New Testament writers saw it, as they have the believers going for the head, not Thor, the believers. They are the head crushers per Romans 16 verse 20. New Testament never connects the Messiah to Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, and God's plan to redeem humanity, reclaim the nations, and revive Eden was dependent on the incarnation of the second Yahweh figure and his subsequent death and resurrection. Hidden in plain sight shows us a glimpse of God's secret plan. See the charts in the book. Adam is shown as the son of God, the son of the king, ruler of Eden, worker of the garden. He is then displaced, he suffers, dies, but lives on through his descendants. Israel's situation is similar to that of Adam's. The chart goes on to show the similarities of each individual. Moses is called by God to be a god, not just to Pharaoh, but also to his brother Levi, and was a conduit of God's power. This line tracks down the kings of Israel, ultimately leading to the king/Messiah. The messianic portrait can only be discerned by assembling 100 terms, phrases, metaphors, and symbols, or the mosaic. In chapter 29, The Rider of the Cloud, there is clear indication that Israel's final Davidic rule would be God becoming man. We are then brought into the epic account of the divine council meeting of Daniel 7. Here we see the Ancient of Days as Yahweh, as well as many thrones in heaven, not just one. The divine council is called into session. All rise. The court comes to order in order to decide the fate of the four beasts, or the national empires. A decision is made to slay the four beasts and to remove their dominion. This is followed by the entrance of our hero, the Messiah. The Ancient of Days and the one like the Son of Man are portrayed as distinct characters. The Son of Man reference is definitely human. The coming on the cloud phrase is a reference usually only given to Yahweh. Origins of the Cloud Rider can be traced back to Ugaritic texts as an image of their supreme god Baal, who was a storm god who ruled the clouds. As a close cultural neighbor to Israel, this is another polemic. Baal was also widely known in the culture surrounding the Mediterranean. The phrase, one who rides the clouds, was also associated with a supreme deity of some sort. Biblical writers were quick to assign this phrase to Yahweh in various scriptures in Deuteronomy and the Psalms, as well as in Isaiah. No doubt for its polemic effect. Daniel 7 has the Son of Man figure as a cloud rider and Yahweh seated. Here we have the two powers. As noted earlier, all other previous references have Yahweh as the cloud rider. In Daniel's account, the cloud rider is the Son of Man and is given everlasting kingship from the Ancient of Days, which alludes to the Davidic covenant. Jesus is seen as the figure in Daniel 7's Son of Man, the cloud rider. He is both human, the Son of Man, and deity, cloud rider. This account is referenced in the New Testament in Matthew 26 as Jesus' trial before the Jewish council. Jesus quotes Daniel 7:13 to the high priest Caiaphas. Caiaphas immediately understood that Jesus was claiming to be the second figure in that scene and tore his robes over the reveal. This was proof of Jesus being the final one in the Davidic line who would reclaim the nations disinherited at Babel. Chapter 30, the kingdom will come. The everlasting kingdom was to come following judgment of the four beasts or empires by the divine council. Daniel consults with one of the divine council members concerning the vision of Daniel 7. We then are told that the beasts are kings. The kingdoms ultimately will be given to the holy ones of the Most High, who will never lose possession of it. It was a Son of Man figure who would receive an everlasting kingdom from the Most High, and the kingdoms were to be given following the judgment of the four beasts. It's important to note that no conflict is reported in the dispersion of the everlasting kingdom. We then go into detail on the fourth beast, the horn that makes war with the holy ones and defeats them, at least initially. This triggers Yahweh to intervene, and they take possession of the kingdom. This passage shows that the four kingdoms are destroyed before the everlasting kingdom is received. But who inherits the kingdom? The Son of Man, the Most High, or the Divine Council? It's still not clear. The Holy Ones of the Most High. Regarding the fourth kingdom, Daniel chapter 2 verses 44 makes the fourth kingdom's affiliation with Rome very obvious. Jesus' arrival during the reign of the Romans as a dominant power. A description of this kingdom has both divine and earthly aspects. We then look at the phrase Holy Ones, Hebrew Geshoshim, I don't know if I'm saying that right, term that means divine council in heaven, or it could also mean people. The phrase refers to both divine council and the human followers of Yahweh. Both rule with Yahweh in an everlasting kingdom. At the end of this section, we get a quick preview of what is to come. The kingdom of God is reborn at the first coming of Jesus. His arrival marks the end of rule of darkness and the initiation of Yahweh's reclamation of the nations ruled by other gods. Jesus is the Son of Man, and the kingdom is his. Ruling with him will be the holy ones of Yahweh's council. In A Coming War of Gods and Men, we look at the day of the Lord, or the final conflict. Yahweh will come with all the heavenly armies to disarm and defeat the hostile superpowers. What does the punishment entail? The answers can be found in Psalms 82. The rule of the other gods will end. Yahweh will reclaim the nations, and Yahweh's loyal divine families will share the rule. This leads to the future re-inheritance of the nations. The day of the Lord is time of judgment as well as rejoicing as the rule of the gods begin to crumble. Yahweh calls his own from among the nations. See Isaiah 66. The people of the disinherited nations will return to Yahweh. Yahweh will succeed where Israel has failed. He will be the agent for his own mission. It's discussion time. What do you make of the effectiveness of God's use of prophets and their ability to maintain loyalty, speak God's truth, and reiterate God's covenant and promises? Did the prophets fail in their tasks, or were they successful? Do you feel prophets have a role today as communicators of God's voice to his people, the body of believers? How do you feel about the use of divine misdirection as a means of misleading the enemies of Yahweh from discovering his redemptive plan for humanity? Do you believe divine misdirection played a major role in the Jews missing their Messiah's visitation? Do you feel divine misdirection still has a significant impact on the Jews' acceptance of Christ as the Messiah today? How does the imagery of Christ as the cloud rider strike you? Could Christ's title as the cloud rider have any significant effect on Christians today? Can you think of a modern version or equivalent that could portray a similar meaning for today's Christian? What do you make of the possibility of being a co-ruler as a divine council member along with the holy ones, Christ and Yahweh? How would you envision what that would be like? Great chapter this week. Thanks for participating. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.